So one of the questions that I'm asked somewhat regularly by viewers is how you go about finding reliable cell phone coverage on the road. Now, if you're in one town, you live in the same place, you probably have a pretty good sense of where you're going to have a signal and where you're not going to have a signal in your town. For example, when I'm in Gillette, Wyoming, I know which parts of town have a decent signal, and I know, for example, in my daughter's house, it's going to be barely usable, even though it's just on the outskirts of town. So you know that when you're in your hometown or somewhere you've lived for a while, or somewhere you spend a lot of time, but when you're on the road traveling around, how do you go about finding coverage? That is a relatively new problem, finding cell coverage on the road. I've been traveling for decades now, quite extensively for about 20 years, and I used to travel cross country on back roads, even through Canada, and often and didn't have a cell phone. We'd just either just be out of touch for days at a time, or maybe stop in at a payphone somewhere at a rest area or whatever, and make a phone call to let folks back home know you were still alive and your trip was progressing. But nowadays, we've all pretty much become accustomed to having cell phones. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, about how to go about finding coverage on the road. It's important to note I'm not going too deep with this conversation. You can get it really technical on this and into a lot of details, but we're not going to do that in this conversation. What this video is going to do is just kind of hit some highlights that if you're getting ready to get on the road or you're newly on the road, this will tell you some of the things I do routinely and how it helps me. But I'm not going to go really deep. What I will do is put a couple links in the description, so if you want to dive into this even more and get really into the more expensive gear or more complicated solutions, or you really want to get technical about it, you can explore that if you want. But this way, hopefully this will be useful to the largest number of people by providing the basics of that I think is probably going to be the extent of what most people are going to do anyways while they're looking for coverage. So why does it matter that we even have cell phone coverage? Well, the first one is, like, for me, I'm a digital nomad, and there are a fair number of us on the road who are digital nomads, and for us to be able to work, we have to be able to have electricity, which is usually through, solar on the roof, and also we need to be able to have connectivity. Now, some people just go to coffee shops, especially people who stay in cities a lot. They might just go to coffee shops or libraries. I actually went into a library the other day to do some uploads, and was actually amazed at how good the connection was, because a lot of times libraries are iffy on the data speed, so that was really good. So those are options if you're in town, but if you're out boondocking or something, you may not want to drive 30 or 60 minutes each way into town to use the internet, especially if you have to do it every day. So you're probably going to be relying on cell data to be able to get online if you're a digital nomad. Yet another reason is family and friends, just staying in touch, especially if you're new on the road. Your family and friends may be nervous about it, and they may be more comfortable if you're able to check in, or they're able to check in with you periodically and see how things are going. You may also have loved ones who have important situations going on, and you want to be able to stay in touch a little more reliably than you'd be able to if you were camping where you did not have a signal. Additionally, most of us probably use the internet on our smartphones extensively for information these days, whether it's getting weather forecasts or just news, or researching the next campsite, or researching where the nearest grocery store is. We do these things using our smartphones in many cases, and take advantage of that data to be able to make things easier for ourselves and to get information. Many people also use their smartphone or their tablet for entertainment, whether that's just reading the news, or following some favorite blogs or whatever, or watching YouTube videos like this one. So there's many reasons why you'd want to have a good cell connection wherever it is you're camping or where you're traveling. That being said, not everyone cares. There are some of you watching this probably who are thinking, hey, so what if I'm offline for... Well, I get that, and I actually love doing that sometimes too, and escaping and getting away from it and being somewhere I'm disconnected, and I don't have to worry about it. And I love to do that once in a while, and I wish I could do it more. And I hope that in the future, and I'm working towards a model, hopefully over time, I'll be able to do that more often. But right now, I pretty much need to be online. Oftentimes 7 days a week, if not 5 or 6 anyway. So it's important to me, and it's important to a lot of people. But I realize not everyone is going to be concerned with having good data and a good cell connection all the time. So one of the top questions then, when you're thinking about getting reliable access to cell signal and to data on the road is which carrier is best. Well, the generally accepted answer, both amongst people who really study this a lot and spend a lot of time on these details, as well as just people who are out here doing it, is that Verizon, as a general rule, will have the best coverage in the most places. Particularly true if you get into the American West. Now, the second carrier in terms of coverage is going to be AT&T. Now, when I first came out to Montana 10 years ago, AT&T was terrible out west. They've improved a lot since then. There's a lot more coverage than there used to be, but even if you look at their coverage map side by side, there definitely is less coverage with AT&T out west than there is with Verizon. The third carrier in terms of coverage is going to be T-Mobile. They're catching up, but again, they're still lagging behind Verizon and AT&T. And then the fourth major one is Sprint, and Sprint you just are not going to want to go with unless you're spending most of your time in cities. If you're out in the rural areas, you'll have in most cases, you'll have the least coverage of those four major carriers. And then, of course, there are local and regional carriers. You don't want to do that unless you're only staying in one area. If you're going to be roaming around all over the place, you really want to go with a national carrier because you're going to get the best coverage. Even if your local carrier tells you you'll have roaming and things, you'll end up getting deprioritized in many cases, and you'll also find places where you just don't have signal. And that also is going to apply to some of the prepaid ones as well. I've seen that firsthand where I was traveling with people who were had a prepaid plan, like through Straight Talk, for example, which then was on Verizon towers, and I had a regular Verizon plan, and we're in the same place, and they had nothing at all, and I actually had a usable signal. So, you know, it's just one of those things worth keeping in mind if it's important to you. All of that being said, there are going to be times when one or the other is better. Just because Verizon has the best coverage in the most places, particularly in the West, doesn't mean that there won't be times when AT&T will be better. So, for example, several times this fall, I was camped with a friend who had an AT&T phone, and there were several occasions where I did not have anything. I couldn't even with a booster, I couldn't get a usable signal, and he was able to have enough of even to stream YouTube videos with AT&T. So there are going to be exceptions, but as a general rule, if you want to give yourself the best likelihood of having a signal in most places, you probably want to go with Verizon first and foremost, AT&T second. If you're really worried about it, or if it's really important to you that you're able to be online or have a good phone signal as much as possible, you'll probably want to have more than one carrier. So, for example, Verizon and AT&T or Verizon and T-Mobile will give you an even better chance of having a signal more often. Because you may be places where Verizon doesn't work, but one of the other ones does have a tower. So if you're really worried about that, that's the way to go, is to actually have more than one carrier. I have not done that yet. I am thinking about adding an second AT&T one with a smaller caps, but just to give me that redundancy. So if I'm somewhere that Verizon's not working, or the Verizon tower goes down, as it did in Leadville this fall, actually, you know, I'd still have an AT&T connection. So then how do you go about choosing campsites that are going to have the best chance of having a signal? Or how do you find campsites where you can hope you're going to have a signal? Well, the first thing is, the trick is to look for campsites that are close to a larger town or a city. And that's not always possible, but when you can, you know, when you're looking at a map saying, where am I going to camp? If you're looking for forest land or BLM land or something close to a city, you're going to have your best chance of having a signal because there's going to be towers in and around the city. And then the second thing is, outside of that, is to look for campsites near a major road or an interstate, because again, there's often towers along major roads and interstates, so you can assume there's probably going to be towers in the area. And then whether you're looking at near a town or city or near a highway or something, you can improve your chances of getting a good signal by looking for elevation. So if there's a hills or mountains outside of that town or near that highway, if you go up on an elevation facing the city still or facing the interstate, that'll give you the best chance of catching those towers. And you'll find, you know, if you go over the hill, your signal often will drop right off because the hill is the mountains in the way of the tower reaching your phone. It's also really helpful, if you're able to do it, to identify nearby towers. Sometimes you're not going to be able to do that. Other times you'll see them go on the road or in town when you're heading out of town, and you'll see them on hills and stuff. And if you ideally you want to be line of sight to a cell phone tower. And so if you can do that, you're going to have the best signal. Like I said, you can't always tell where they're at. But if you're able to identify where the tower is at and then look for campsites that are line of sight to that, you'll have the best signal and the best coverage. Now, I camped once with a friend who had an Android phone, and he actually had an app on his phone that would show where the tower was and how far away the tower was and how strong the signal was. I've never been able to find one like that for iPhone on iOS. So if you happen to know one of those iOS, I definitely would love to find one, and I'm even willing to pay for it. I just have not been able to find one, whether free or paid. But that was, as of a year and a half ago, was available on Android. So if you got an Android phone, you might want to look at that, because that's really helpful. If you have any kind of signal at all, it'll at least point you to where the tower is, and you can adjust your search for campsite to try and get yourself in line with that tower. And, you know, for example, if it's the other side of a hill, you can try and look for campsites one or the other side of the hill where you'll have a better line of sight to the tower. And finally, you want to be as close to the tower as possible, or as practical, if you're concerned about a good signal and good data speeds. The further away you get, the signal gets weaker. I've camped 10, 20 miles from tower and be able to use it, especially with a booster. But like this recent example, when I was saying, we had gone to a place and we couldn't get a signal. We were able to position ourselves on a hill overlooking town, and we could at least pick up a signal, but it was too weak to really be usable. In that case, I think we were about 30 miles from town, and even with a booster, it just wasn't very usable. It was just too weak of a signal. So the closer you can get to the tower, the better off you're going to be. So if you're looking at campsites, for example, and you see a campsite, 30 miles from a town, he's probably, and 30 miles from a major highway, it's probably questionable whether you'll have a signal there. Now, there's some exceptions to that. Sometimes you'll pick up a good signal in crazy places. But in terms of planning and tipping the odds in your favor, you're generally going to want to stay closer to towns or major roads, unless you know there's a tower, near where you're going to be camping. It also helps to research coverage before you set out for a campsite. That can hopefully save you some aggravation. The first place to start with that is with your the coverage maps from your cell carrier. You can go to Verizon, for example, and find the coverage map, and it shows for the whole country. You can zoom in to a certain extent. It doesn't provide a lot of detail. It doesn't show major roads and stuff, so you're kind of left guessing a little bit. And it's also going to be a little hard to find. They have it buried. But you can do a Google search for a Verizon coverage map, and you'll find a link to it on Verizon's website. And all the carriers usually have those maps. Those are illustrations of where coverage technically should be available. Your experience may vary, but that's at least a starting point. If you're looking at camping in an area where your carrier says they don't have coverage, it's probably a safe bet you're not going to have coverage there. Okay, the second thing I use, that I actually use more than the carrier maps anymore, is an app called Coverage, and that's put out by the folks at Technomadia, and it overlays the cell carrier coverage maps, and actually you can see roads and cities. So it's really much more helpful for zooming in and trying to figure out where you're going to have coverage. Again, and they'll be the first ones to tell you this, it's based on what the carriers say there should be coverage, and so your results may vary, so you still have to sometimes have to get there and see. But at least it can, again, point you in the right direction and give you a reasonable hope that you may find a signal somewhere. Finally, you can also use an app like Sensorly. There's several of them that do similar things. And Sensorly, for example, has several tools. It has a speed test component, which I use quite frequently. If I pull into a campsite and I'm thinking about staying, I'll run a speed test, because those little bars on your phone, you get 4 or 5 bars or dots to tell you how strong your signal is. That's a measurement of several things, and it doesn't always correlate to a great data connection. So I'll do a speed test, and sometimes 3 bars will be really good and 4 or 5 bars will be iffy for data. So I always check that before I set up camp. When I'm checking places out, I take a look at that and see how that goes. But then what they do is they basically crowdsource that information, and so you can go in and look at maps they have that show where people have done speed tests and see what kind of results they got on your carrier. It's most helpful in cities because where most of the speed tests get done. So sometimes you'll be going to an area. The fact that it doesn't show speed tests in your area doesn't mean there isn't necessarily coverage where you're going to look to camp. It just means they don't have reporting from there. So, but it is one more tool. If you have people already reporting from that area showing a signal, it gives you an idea of what the speed might be. And I'll include links to both of those apps in the description if you want to check them out and see more. Okay, so another really helpful tool if you're concerned about having coverage, whether it's just for voice or text messages or for using the internet, is a booster. A cell booster can make a big difference in many situations, but not all. Sometimes you'll hook up the booster and it's been a fantastic improvement. You'll go and you'll see a big bump in the indicated signal strength, and you'll also see a big bump in performance. If you're doing a speed test, you do one before and after, you'll see a big bump in performance. Other times, it makes little to no difference at all. So it's not magic, it's not a guarantee, but it's one more tool that can make a big difference sometimes. Important to note with boosters, they cannot boost a non-existent signal. So if you're somewhere that simply a signal is not reaching, it cannot boost that because there's no signal. What it does is catches a signal that's weak and amplifies it so that you can have a better connection to it. WeBoost is one of their most popular ones. It's formerly Wilson Electronics, and they rebranded as WeBoost. The drive is the one I have. Is just mounts to the dashboard. A little stick antenna goes in the roof. It works reasonably well. There are bigger ones that for RVs and stuff. The one with this one, with the WeBoost drive, is that it has a cradle, so you put your phone or your MiFi in that cradle. But there are ones for RVs that just rebroadcast the signal, and you can have multiple devices using Witham at the same time. You can also get further improvement with a booster by using a directional antenna rather than the little magnet antenna on the roof. The directional antennas, you do have to put them on a pole, and you have to have a way to secure them to your vehicle so they're steady and not blowing around in the wind. And there's a little more setup. Once you hook them up, you have to dial them around and get them pointed right at the tower. Another case where that app would come in handy if you know exactly where the tower is at. And so you watch and see as your signal strength improves, and then you clamp it down so the pole doesn't move anymore. And I don't have one of those. I know several people who do, and they say it definitely makes a big difference. So that's something to think about if you like to get way off the beaten path and signal strength is important to you. So basically, to wrap it up, start with choosing the carrier that's likely to have the best coverage where you plan to do a lot of time traveling or camping. And of course, you can do 2 or more carriers if you're really concerned about it. So Verizon and AT&T or Verizon and T-Mobile, that'll give you your best chance of always having a signal. And then secondly, camp as close to town or to a highway as possible, because that's where the cell towers are most likely to be. And so the closer you can be to those towers, the better the signal you're usually going to have. And also look for elevation when you're camping. If you can get up on a hill or a rise above town or above the highway, you're likely to have a better signal because you're less likely to have interference from hills or forests or buildings or whatever in the way. Now, thirdly, researching in advance can improve your success. If you have a good idea where you can expect a signal, again, by looking at whether you're near a town or city or near a highway and what reported coverage is like there, that can tip the odds in your favor. Sometimes you'll still find a campsite that just doesn't have a good signal, but at least you have a better success and more of your attempts will be successful. And then fourth, consider a booster for boosting those weak signals, especially if you like to get out away from the crowds or away from roads and away from cities and stuff. The further out you want to go, the more likely it'll be that you'll need to use a booster to amplify the signal to be able to get the coverage you need. And then finally, you can dive deeper into this. I'll have links in the description for a few sites you can look to learn even more if you want to learn more about this. So, like I said, this is definitely not a totally comprehensive overview, but these are the tools I use to find cell coverage on the road, and these are the things that I think probably this is about the extent of what most people are going to want to get into in terms of trying to find coverage. I think most people are not going to want to get carried away with really expensive and complicated boosting options or carrying devices from 3 or 4 different carriers to try and optimize their chances of always having a signal. So I think these are the things that are going to be most helpful to the most people. But again, I'll put links in the description if you want to dive deeper and learn even more about this topic. Meanwhile, so that's it for today. I appreciate you joining me for this video. I hope this was helpful to you. I know I get a lot of questions about this topic. If you have more questions I didn't address here, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll try and answer them there, or maybe do a second video and cover more stuff if there's additional details that you want to know that I'm able to answer you about with some degree of knowledge. I don't want to be telling you about stuff I don't know about, but I've been on the road for a couple of years now, full-time, and these are things I use. And like I said, I am a digital nomad, so I have to have a connection just about every day of the week. Once in a while, I'll take off for a couple days away from a signal, but for the most part, I have to be able to be online to work. So it's important to me. It's really important to me. So this is something I've had to learn and get proficient at, and these are the things that most of the time work for me to get a signal. So I hope this was helpful to you. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if you're not subscribed already, maybe hit the subscribe and ring the bell so you get notified when I publish new videos. I try to put up 3 a week about travel and van life and videos of nature and that sort of thing. So if you're interested in that stuff, you may want to subscribe so you don't miss any of these. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.